Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to SCI. So I'm Alan Bayliss. I'm the Chairman of the Board of Trustees here, and I'm also the Chairman for tonight's public evening lecture. So I'm just going to say a few words of welcome and housekeeping before I introduce Professor Napier. So a few words about, well, yes, I wasn't sure what the next slide was going to be, but right, fire safety. So there's no fire alarm scheduled for this evening, so if one goes off, we have to take it seriously. And the exit is through this door here to my right, which leads up onto the street. Yeah, reminder, please put your mobile phones on silent or turn them off, please. There will be a recording of the lecture you can look at later, but no photographs while the speaker is speaking tonight, please. I believe it's not actually being streamed anywhere else tonight. Yeah, a few words about SCI. I expect many of you have been here before. Anybody who hasn't been to SCI before? Okay, yes, so a few people coming in. Well, welcome to SCI for the first time then. So as the rest of you will probably know by now, that SCI was founded nearly 140 years ago, and its role was to bring together businessmen in the Victorian age with scientists of the time to try and innovate and exploit new science coming out, and that remains our purpose today. It's where science meets business, and it's a forum for discussing science across many different areas, particularly agri-food, energy, environment, health and materials being our 5 main sectors. And as you see from the timeline there are many famous names in the widest definition of the chemical industry who've been involved in SCI over the years. You can, of course, become SCI members, and we'd welcome you all to do so if you'd like to do that. And there'll be staff around tonight you can talk to if you have any interest in becoming members. Okay, so I'm going to go on now to introduce our speaker tonight, who's Professor Jonathan Napier. So Jonathan is one of the senior scientists at Rothamsted Research Station, which is even older than SCI actually, and I think it's the oldest research station in the world. And it's still a fabulous place to go and visit if you got the chance to do that. Jonathan has been particularly involved in the research on GM crops there, and there have been a number of GM field trials over recent years, probably one of the very few in Europe, in fact. So Rothamsted continues to be a leading light in biological sciences. So Jonathan is a plant biotechnologist, hails originally from the University of Nottingham, and has been working at Rothamsted for a number of years now, seeing the whole project through really in terms of putting omega-3 fish oils into plants. So Jonathan, I'd like to welcome you, and over to you for your lecture.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening, and as Alan said, I'm going to try and tell you about the project we've been working on at Rothamsted for quite a long time, actually. It sort of pains me to think about how long I've been working on it, but not for the entire length of Rothamsted's lifespan, because Rothamsted's been there for 176 years. This is a whippersnapper of a project, only being 20-something years old, which of course means I started it when I was 13. That may not be the only thing that I tell you that is not entirely truthful. Yeah, so I'm going to tell you in the next 40 minutes or so the whole story of the project that we've been doing about trying to make omega-3 fish oils in plants. And you'll be pleased to know I'm not going to tell you about it in nuts and bolts of how we're trying to do it in terms of all the gory details of the genetic engineering. If you want to know about that, please, you can come and ask me afterwards. But I think it's an easier narrative if I don't try and make it super technical, because I find it boring. So I think and everybody else would find it boring too. And the way that we've structured the talk is really to try and give you the background, I guess, the context, the motivation for why we're trying to do it and why we think it's important. And I think that's really, nowadays, when it comes to talking about research, it's really important to do that, to explain to people why you're trying to do something. And far too often scientists think that they don't have to do that, or it's somebody else's job to do it. I think it's really important to explain to people, to society, why you're doing research. Not least of all, usually, because they're the people paying for it. You know, the taxpayer pays for what we do, and therefore I think the taxpayer should at least be indulged with being explained, you know, what the purpose of the research is. So hopefully you won't be asking for your money back at the end of this, but we will see, won't we? So let me tell you about the project. Okay, so this is my, if any of you, this is my, whatever it is, Twitter handle, so you can tweet me, preferably not anything rude or abusive. And really this is the title of the talk, which is Sustainable Food Chains, Making Fish Oils from Plants. And then I put this sort of sub-clause underneath it, which is how GM can help deliver enhanced crops for better human nutrition. So that's really part of the focus of what we're trying to do. And this is my email address, so you can contact me also at my email address. So the way I've structured it, like I said, is it's in several phases of the talk. And the first phase is really explaining why we're interested in omega-3 fish oils and why they're important, and what, you know, why we think they need to be made in transgenic plants. So why are omega-3 fish oils important? Well, and these are just the headline bullet points, and then in the next few slides I'll really talk you through the evidence for these statements. So the simple things to remember, though, is that they are beneficial for human health. They're a limited natural resource. There's no natural plant source available, and they're a valuable and important ingredient of aquafeed diet. So I'm going to talk you through all those 4 points with the next 4 slides, I think. And the first thing I have to do, and this is like is probably the worst slide that I've got, which I put in at the last minute because I realized I was confusing myself, and then all the formatting went crazy. So it looks a bit of a mess. I mean, it looks even more of a mess than it normally is. But the thing I have to tell you, and this is the thing that's really important to remember, is when we're talking about omega-3 fatty acids, omega-3 is a sort of, omega-3 is just it's a term that's used to describe a whole family of fatty acids. And not all omega-3s are the same. And we're interested in a particular subclass of omega-3s, these omega-3 fish oils. And calling them omega-3 fish oils, as I'll tell you in a minute, is really actually a really bad name. Actually, their proper name is omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, which is why I call them omega-3 fish oils. But you could call them omega-3 PUFAs, and you'll probably see on the slide sometime I call them omega-3 PUFAs. And they're called long chain because this tells you the number of carbons in the particular fatty acids. So it's 20 or 22, and the number after the colon tells you the number of double bonds. So they're polyunsaturated. So these are long chain polyunsaturated fatty acids. These are the omega-3 long chain polyunsaturates that you find in fish oils. So these are the important ones. So these are the ones that I'm talking about. And if you look, this is the composition of a fish oil, and it doesn't really matter what fish you look at, whether it's an anchovy, cod liver, sardine, salmon, tuna, whatever you like, you can see that they all contain some levels of these omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids. They're present in all of them, to varying levels. And this is a vegetable oil, so these are seed oils, whether it's soybean oil or palm oil or rapeseed oil or sunflower oil or linseed oil, there's nothing there. So there's none of these omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturates, these omega-3 fish oils, in any plant oil, in any seed oil. There's just none there. And anybody who tells you there is incorrect. I was going to say something else, but I won't. Now, but sometimes people say, well, there are plants that have got omega-3s in them, and they're exactly right. They do have omega-3s in them. So this particular fatty acid over here, which is 18 carbons and has got 3 double bonds, but it's an omega-3 fatty acid. Now, but it's not the same as these longer chain forms. So plants do have these shorter chain omega-3s, but they don't have these longer chain omega-3s. And that's, you know, this is the thing that causes an immense amount of confusion, because you can go into the supermarket and every third thing on the shelf says high in omega-3. You know, whether it's a dog food or a shampoo or I don't know what. But most of them aren't actually containing the useful, the valuable omega-3s that you find in fish oils, they contain these vegetable omega-3s. So if you learn nothing from this evening, and that's quite possible, if you learn nothing other than to check the tiny print on the back of your margarine or whatever when it says high in omega-3, you'll probably find it says something like contains linseed oil or oilseed rape, and it's containing a vegetable omega-3. And unfortunately, that's not the form that is health beneficial. It's the omega-3 fish oil. So when people told you to take cod liver oil, they were right. They didn't say drink lots of flax oil, because it's not the same thing. So I realize I've labored the point somewhat, probably to death, but I think it's important to clarify that, because it'll be important for when we go through the rest of the talk. Now, I said the omega-3 fish oils, the omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, are health protective. And now there's really good evidence, both genetic and from dietary studies, from nutritional studies and epidemiological studies. So there's a whole barrel of, that's not an actual a measurement, there's a very large volume of evidence that would indicate that omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, omega-3 fish oils, are health beneficial. In particular, that they can reduce your risk of cardiovascular diseases and type 2 diabetes. So if you go to your GP and say, I'm interested in my cardiovascular health, your GP or your health professional will tell you to get more. The first thing they'll probably say is get more omega-3 fish oils into your diet. And they'll also tell you to do that by eating more oily fish rather than by taking supplements, because it's better to eat these things as a whole food. So there's a great interest in getting people to eat more of these omega-3s, and I'll tell you in a minute why that's potentially a problem. But the thing that's lurking here is this sort of realization that actually, and I think I show it on the next slide, is that there's a sort of global pandemic now across the world that is basically blighting the lives of billions of people, and these are diseases that are not as a result of people having not enough food to eat. They're as a result of people having too much of food to eat or eating really, really badly. I mean, so it's a real concern that actually when we talk about food security, people have this vision of starving people in the developing world. Actually, food security also relates to people that are suffering from these diseases of overconsumption, particularly things like type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. These things are a massive pandemic across the globe. This is figures from the WHO, and 1 in 11 people have type 2 diabetes on the planet. 1 in 11 people. I find that an absolutely staggering statistic, that people are suffering from these metabolic diseases that are predominantly as a consequence of overconsumption. I mean, that's just really, really frightening. In the UK, it's a huge problem. It's a growing problem, and it's a sort of problem that is blind to where you're born or where you're living, because it's a problem in North America, it's a problem in China, it's a problem in Bangladesh. It doesn't really matter what your ethnic background is. If you overconsume, then you will be at risk of this particular metabolic disease. Now, what's this got to do with omega-3 fish oils? It relates to omega-3 fish oils because, as I said, if you have as part of a healthy diet, omega-3 fish oils are an absolutely essential component to reduce your risk of these metabolic diseases, of which type 2 diabetes is one. So it's a real, having enough fish oils for every person on the planet is a really critical thing. So this is a slide which I hope has got animation on it. So why have I got this here? So fish, omega-3, the world and everything. Oh yeah, this is somebody else's slide. I borrowed it. I always look at it and think, why on earth have I put this on? So this tells you the stuff that we all know, which is the population on the planet is continually growing relentlessly. And that's another pressure that we have to think about when we're thinking about the sustainability of things. So when I was born, I lied when I said I was 13 or whenever it was. I was born in 1962. And the population of the planet then was under 3 million. 3 billion. I mean, so the population now is over 7 billion. So in my lifetime, the population has doubled and is continuing to trend upwards. So what it means is we've got these many, many, many more mouths to feed, and we need to feed them in a way that is fair and equitable, so that everybody gets a fair share of these nutrients, and including these omega-3 fish oils, which I've already told you are really important for their health and nutrition. So how, the bigger question is, how are we going to do that? Now, the primary source of omega-3s is the clue being the name. Where do these omega-3 fish oils come from? Well, they come from fish. And so this is the problem, is that this graph shows you world fish production, and this is just the stuff that's fished out of the oceans. And you can see since like about, I don't know, the mid 1990s, the production is completely flat. It's completely flat. So basically, we are at the maximum level of sustainability of by taking stuff out of the oceans. A lot of people would argue we're taking too much out of the oceans. But this is being managed in a way to keep it completely flat. But remember, we've got to do something about these numbers going up. We've got to feed everybody. And this is where fish farming comes in. I'm going to tell you about fish farming. I already mentioned it very briefly at the start. Fish farming is aquaculture, the production of fish. Now, this is really important because it's really the fastest growing animal food producing sector on the planet. And the sort of amazing thing about fish farming is that since 2015, the majority of all the seafood consumed on this planet is produced by aquaculture. So everybody thinks most of the food that you eat, the fish you eat, has been produced by the wild capture, by people going out in boats and pulling stuff out of nets and things like that. It's not like that. It's produced by fish farming. So if you go to the supermarket, I walk past Waitrose on the way here, other supermarkets are available, and if you went in there, and almost all of the fish on those shelves will be produced by fish farming. All the salmon, all the seafood, all of that will be produced by fish farming. It's an incredibly important industry. And the reason I'm telling you about it is that it has, for the bulk of it, it has an absolute Achilles heel, which is that you need to feed the fish omega-3 fish oils. It's like, what's he talking about? So the reason you have to do that is because that fish don't make fish oils, okay? This is the bit where it all gets a bit confusing. I told you it was a really bad name. So omega-3 fish oils are not made by fish. Although we get them from fish, the fish don't actually make the omega-3 fish oils. In the marine environment, it's the marine microalgae, those little unicellular organisms, they're the things that are making the omega-3 fish oils, but they're omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids. Those are the things that are making these really important fatty acids, and the fish just eat them as part of the food web. But that's what happens in the ocean. But if you're in a fish farm, it's not like that. You're sort of dependent on what you get fed. And so as the fish farming industry increases, it increases the demand of these omega-3s to be fed to the fish. So it gets quite complicated, and in terms of the pressure that it's putting on the marine environment. So I'll tell you about this. So I talk about meanwhile down on the farm. We're very interested in farming at Rothamsted. I put this slide up and shows you a picture of a fish farm, and everybody basically groans, and rightly so. But this is how most fish is produced. This is a salmon farm up on the west coast of Scotland, in a beautiful location. But it's absolutely dependent on what's fed to the fish to ensure that they have the right fatty acid in their diet to ultimately then deliver that to you, depending on, so that you get the omega-3s that you expect in your salmon fillet. And this is where the big problem comes in, because, as I told you, the global population is going up. Fish farming is going up. The amount of fish that you can take out of the ocean is flat. So what's the consequence of that? The consequence of that is that over the last 10 years, farm salmon has now got half the levels of omega-3 fish oils in it than it had 10 years ago. So in 2006, you went into the supermarket and you bought your salmon fillet. It had this amount of you had this amount of EPA and DHA. These are the omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids. These are the things that are doing you good. You go and buy one now, actually probably now it's got even less in it. So why is that? Well, it's because there's just not enough omega-3s to go around. There's just not enough. There's not enough in the ocean. and as I say, the fish farming industry is just consuming more and more and more. And I think that's a big problem. And also, I think it's I think it's somewhat surprising that nobody mentioned this to the consumer, that salmon fillet that you bought now has got half of the nutritional important component as it had 10 years ago. So it's a problem. Okay, so this is my summary slide about fish farming, and it sort of summarizes everything that I've just been telling you, which is basically, so the omega-3 fish oils, these long-chain polyunsaturates, they're actually made by marine microalgae. They're not made by fish. So wild fish take them up in their food chain. Farmed fish have to be fed with fish oil because they're stuck in a cage. They're not out there swimming around eating stuff. They're just waiting for the farmer to turn up and feed them. So they're sort of like the couch potato version of a salmon, if you can have a couch potato version of a salmon. But maybe that's pushing the metaphor a bit far, but the analogy. But anyway, so the farm fish has to be fed fish oil. Otherwise, the thing that you eat as the consumer doesn't have the health benefits in it. So that's a big problem. And these reduction fisheries, so these are the fisheries that are being harvested out of the ocean to produce the fish oils to feed into the fish farming industry. They're at the absolute maximum level of sustainability. So they're things like Peruvian anchovies and capelin, mehedrin and stuff like that. So small bony fish we wouldn't eat directly, but they're being sort of hoovered out of the oceans to be ground up to feed fish in the fish farms. But as the fish farms expand, there's just not enough stuff to go around. So that's why we need a new sustainable source of fish oil. So that's why, in my long-winded introduction, I'm telling you why it's really important to have a new source of omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids, a new source of omega-3 fish oils, because there's just not enough to go around. And we need to ensure that everybody has a fair share of this really important nutrient, especially with this, like I say, these global pandemics of cardiovascular diseases. Now, I'm not suggesting that omega-3 fish oils is some sort of Bing magic bullet that is going to convert you from some sort of, overweight person sitting on the sofa. If your lifestyle consists of eating pizzas and drinking heavily and smoking and watching, binging in front of the TV, taking some fish oil is not going to transform you into some, super fit Adonis. It's not going to be like that. But it is going to, if as part of your healthy lifestyle, it's essential to have omega-3 fish oils in it. They're really important. So we need a new source of omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturates. We can't rely on the oceans to produce it. It's not fair on the oceans. We need to do something on land. So we want a new source of omega-3s. We want a terrestrial source of omega-3s. We want to use agriculture to service the needs of aquaculture, if you like. That's the way I look at it. Because if you can do it on land, if you can use agriculture, agriculture is completely scalable. So you can, whether you grow something on 1 acre or 1 million acres, it's pretty much the same. I mean, you need a bigger tractor, but you probably need quite a lot of tractors. But I mean, the technology is the same. You don't need to do anything particularly radically different. So that was our idea. And this is a slide I put this slide up. This is a slide that I made in 1996. Like I said, when I was 13. And it was to summarize basically what our idea was how to make omega-3 long-chain PUFAs in a heterologous host, which is a complicated way of saying, how can we make omega-3 fish oils in a plant? And the idea was, okay, well, I've told you already, it's these are the marine microalgae, these are the unicellular organisms. They're the things that are actually making these omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturated fatty acids. We call them omega-3 fish oils, but these don't look like fish to me. These are the things that are actually making the omega-3s. And the idea was, look, could we find the genes in these marine microalgae and put them into a plant and engineer the plant so that it has the capacity to now make the omega-3 fish oils? In 1996, I thought, we'll be done by the millennium. Obviously, it turned out to be slightly more complicated than that. So that was the idea. Now, it was complicated because at the time, and I won't dwell on this, but it's sort of like, I present this a bit like an excuse for why it took so long to get it to work. It was complicated. And this is the pathway to make these omega-3s. And we're really interested in this. This is the one I mentioned earlier, this 20 carbon or the 22 carbon. So EPA and DHA. these are the omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturates that have these health benefits. These are the ones that we really want to make. And the plants obviously don't make them, as I've said previously, and we have to engineer the plants so that they can make EPA and DHA. And you have to put lots of genes into the plant, so every one of these steps is an enzyme that converts the plant fatty acids towards the omega-3 long-chain form. So converting the plant fatty acid down to EPA and DHA. So each one of these steps is an enzyme, and so therefore each one of these steps is a new gene. So you have to put all of these genes into the plant to make it do this thing that you want it to do. And that turns out to be quite difficult to do that. And we started working with a plant species, so we did quite a lot of work in model systems. We decided to work in an oilseed crop called Camelina, and this is like I describe it as a cousin of oilseed rape. So it's a member of the Brassicaceae, but it's not oilseed rape. So it doesn't have some of the problems that oilseed rape has. It doesn't cross-pollinate. It doesn't have pod shatter. But it's really nice. It's got lots of this. So this is the omega-3 I mentioned. This is the vegetable, the plant short-chain omega-3, which is the precursor, if you like, of EPA and DHA. It's got lots of that, so we can convert that to EPA and DHA. It doesn't have any of those in this trace because we haven't engineered the genes in yet. So that was the idea. So we had lots of other advantages that we liked. It was easy to transform. It grew really quickly, so you could grow it, and it would go from seed to seed in 4 months or something like that. So that's all great. So it was a really nice crop to work with. This is just a representation of all the, we talk about these things as being parts. People talk about them as parts, but in fact they're just the genes that are from that pathway I showed you, that each one of those steps. So you can have different genes from different algae, and you can sort of mix them together and build these constructs so that now that you've got the genes being regulated by promoters, and they're only expressing our genes in the seeds. So in no other part of the plant is there any accumulation of EPA or DHA. We just want it in the seeds because, like I mentioned already, we want to basically use agriculture to make these oils. So, and part of agriculture is not just growing the plants, but it's processing the plants and extracting the oil and knowing how to handle the oil. And we do that all the time. We produce millions and millions of tons of vegetable oil. So we know how to do that. So that's all good. So these another slide of constructs, just to demonstrate that we were doing stuff. We weren't just talking about it. Well, I was talking about it. There were people doing stuff. And the sort of take-home message is that after building all these constructs and trying really hard to get them to work in different systems and testing them and refining them and sort of almost combinatorially changing one gene for another, we got to a point where actually you think, actually, you know what? I think this has worked. And I can show you that it's worked because this is this is a pie chart. This is actually just a pie chart of that GC trace I showed you on the 2 or 3 slides back. So this is the fatty acid profile of Camelina seed, and the biggest slice is this alpha-linolenic acid. This is the 18-carbon omega-3 plant oil. That's the major component of Camelina seed oil. And it doesn't have any of these, which is EPA and DHA, which are the long-chain omega-3 fish oils that you find in, for example, this fish oil. So this is a good example of a northern hemisphere fish oil. It's got about 25% of the total fatty acid is EPA and DHA. So that's what we're trying to get to. You know, we want to replicate that. And actually, that's what we've managed to do. And if I sound like I'm patting myself on the back, then I probably am, and I apologise for that. But I think it was a big achievement to do this, and lots of people contributed to it, and we think it's something that we're very, very pleased about. And so what you can see is that actually now we have a seed oil from our GM Camelina that makes the same amount of EPA and DHA pretty much as you find in a fish oil. So now, suddenly you've got a land-based source of omega-3 fish oils. You can grow this and it'll make omega-3 fish oils and think, wow, that's great, I can retire, brilliant. You know, but it turns out it's not quite that straightforward, because actually if you look a bit more carefully, you can see the fatty acid profile is not exactly the same as you find in a fish oil. It's got the same levels of EPA and DHA, but there's some other things in there that are not the same. So there's still sort of work to be done. Now this was produced in nearly 5 years ago. So there was stuff that still needed to be done to refine it, and I guess the most important thing for us was also to demonstrate that the plants were behaving in a way that would allow them to be grown in the real world, to grow them like an agricultural crop. So this is what the plants look like when you grow them in the greenhouse. This is a wild-type Camelina plant, and these are our GM ones. This one's just making EPA, and this one's making EPA and DHA. And what's great about this slide, which is quite uninteresting, well, it's quite boring, they all look the same. And that's exactly what I want them to look the same, because we've engineered them only to make EPA and DHA in their seeds. So these little bobbles on the end here are the seed pods, and inside the seed pods are the pods. No, inside the seed pods are the seeds, and inside the seeds is the oil. And that's the only part of the plant that's got these non-native fatty acids, these omega-3 fish oils. So that's great. And I don't really know why I put this slide in, but it's probably to say we were going to do even more experiments to try and improve the fatty acid composition now. And this is a picture of some very complicated mass spectrometry that we did, which made us quite realize that actually the great thing about doing these experiments is not only that we get a plant that makes omega-3 fish oils, but it also becomes a resource for understanding lipid metabolism. And using some very advanced imaging, you can start to realize that actually the plant is really not working at the maximum potential to make these fatty acids. You could really enhance it more, but I'm not going to tell you about that now because I don't think I've got time. But what I am going to tell you about is the next step on that journey, which the sort of trite thing people say on reality TV shows or something. But I do feel like it has been a bit of a journey to get to where we have. And and where we got to in 2012 or 2013, like I said, was those plants with the pie chart. We knew that we could make these omega-3 fish oils, but we were making them in the lab. And what we really want to do them is in the field, because, for all the reasons I told you at the front about, how we want to have an impact when we need to help the aquaculture industry, the fish farming industry, and deliver health and nutrition to the growing global population, you're not going to be able to do that in a greenhouse, in a laboratory. You need to go into the field. And therefore, if you want to go into the field, then you have to go down a path of trying to demonstrate that your GM plant, because these are GM, is safe, and you can demonstrate that by doing GM field trials. And you also need to demonstrate that it is going to be amenable to agriculture and behave in a way that is predictable, that the plants will always make these omega-3s, and they'll behave in a way that is going to be useful to the farmer. And you have to do that by doing GM field trials. And as we've already heard in the introduction, doing GM field trials in Europe is something that really has sort of dropped out of favour over the last decade or so. But it's something that we wanted to do, and so we started to do them again 7 or 8 years ago at Rothamsted. And as my little slide here and all that entails. And so this is a slide from when we were doing the first field trials in 2014, and I have real mixed feelings about showing this slide, because it sort of, depending on your point of view, you can look at this and you can take from it what you like, because you look at it and think, okay, well, what do I see here? I see somebody sort of being open to the gate, because this is our field trial compound, and like there's a security guard here, and there's somebody videoing all of this in a sort of, for whatever reason. And you can think, well, it's really bad, there's security, there's like these guard dog signs, and like somebody, like whenever you go to protest, you always see people videoing each other and things like this in a slightly confrontational fashion. But what actually the story is, so this is a camera person from the BBC. So this is somebody from BBC Countryfile making a documentary about our GM field trials, because we invited them to come and do that, and they wanted to do that so they could demonstrate, there's nothing sort of covert or scary or a secret about what we're doing. We're trying to do this in the completely full glare of public disclosure and in the public domain. And the only reason we've got all these gates and security guards is that because when we've previously done GM field trials, we had one example where somebody climbed over the fence and tried to disrupt the experiment. I always find it strange that we were trying to do an experiment to see whether a technology was going to work or not, and somebody wanted to disrupt that experiment. And it sort of seems like it's a strange motivation. I'm not saying these people have a wrong point of view, but I think it would have been better just to sit down and talk about it. But anyway, so this is us doing our field trials. And this is what our field trial site looks like from the air. And this is a shot from our drone, one of our drones. And you can see, so this is the field trial site here, and it's got 2 big fences and things around it. And to be honest, I really hate the fact that we've got fences around our trial site, because this is the rest of the Rothamsted experimental farm. I'd much rather be able to do my experiment like a normal agricultural experiment, rather than be sort of caged behind these fences, because it gives the impression that what we're doing is something that's dangerous or bad or whatever, and I don't believe it is. And for all the reasons I've told you at the start, I really think what we're trying to do is something that could be beneficial and could be helpful. But anyway, so the rules are that if you want to do an environmental release for GM field trial, you have to do it in this way. So that's what we do, and I'm fine with that. And so we've been doing these trials now for a number of years, and I think every time we do them, they sort of get bigger and bigger, because they allow you to do more things and understand how the crop performs in the field. Because, like I said, really, I just want to be able to demonstrate the practical utility of what I've done. So I spent quite a lot of time doing complicated metabolic engineering to get the plants to make these omega-3 fish oils. But really, the next challenge is to demonstrate, like I say, does it work in the field? Does it work in the real world? Because I could have been as clever as you like in the laboratory, and if it doesn't work in the field, it's a waste of time. It really is. And and so you need to find that out. And so that's why doing these experiments are really important. So what I really liked after, 2 years, we actually managed to harvest the crop with our little mini combine harvester, because previously we were cutting them with scissors, which I was in the field, but it wasn't really like, this wasn't really how farming works. I don't think many farmers go out with a pair of nail scissors and cut the plants, so this is great. So we upgraded, after 2 years we could do it on a scale that required you to use a combine, and that's, and then we went to a bigger scale and did some experiments in Manitoba, in Canada. Now you're sort of up to starting to get to a reasonable size of a field. It's only a few hectares, but it starts to give you some idea of what you can do. And I think but it also gives you an insight into simple things that, if you're a laboratory scientist like I am, that you've never thought of previously, which are things like the logistics of getting from A to B, and how am I going to harvest this and get it to the crusher to get the oil out and then feed it to the fish and do all of this stuff. I never thought about that until I started doing this experiment, where I was growing the stuff in Manitoba and had to get them shipped to Saskatoon to be crushed and then shipped to Denmark to be made into fish feed to feed the fish in Scotland. By that time I realised I'd spent more money on postage than I had on growing the crop, which is like, and so, but that was this is the slide that made me realise I need to get a haircut. But this is my great collaborators, Doug and Monica, who are at the University of Stirling, and this is the end point of that journey of getting stuff, this is a different type of field trial. So we did a field trial to grow the crops in Canada, to get the oil, to do the feeding study on this salmon farm in Scotland. And I think, to me that was a fantastic thing, to actually get to the point where you've done all this work and this effort to get to a point to actually test your idea. Is that the oil I made in my plants, is it going to be the same as a fish oil, and can I feed it to salmon, and will the salmon be the same as salmon that have just been fed their regular diet? It's sort of really exciting. It doesn't sound very exciting, and I can understand that people are completely underwhelmed by that as a scientific hypothesis. It's never going to get me a paper in Nature. But I think, I think it's important to do, and I think it's really important from a societal point of view that we're trying to do something that could ultimately have benefit to society and consumer. And I think, and that's why I spend a lot of my time talking about the research and saying why I think it's important, and not dwelling on how clever I've been in terms of making a GM plant. I'm more interested in explaining to people the context of what it is I'm doing and why I think it's worth doing. And I think if you do that, then maybe sometimes you can get the message across to both to the public and also to the media, because I think people assume that the media, well, lots of my scientific colleagues always assume, and it really annoys me, they always assume that the media is out to get them. It's like, I'm not going to talk to the press because they're just going to say what I'm doing is a waste of time. And I would say, well, maybe you've probably explained it rather badly then. It's not up to them to try and decipher your genius thoughts. It's probably up to you to explain it more clearly. And that's I like to believe that at Rothamsted we set out with our GM field trials to try and explain as clearly as possible what it was we were doing and why we were doing it. Now, and I don't think we were successful all of the time, but I think we've really tried hard to do that. And these are some headlines from newspapers, which I think would hopefully be evidence that at least we've communicated well. And I always put this slide up this is an article from the Times about our first salmon feeding trial. And what I like about this is that the Times drew this little graphic to explain what it is we were doing, explain the problems with salmon farming that we've just talked about. And so they drew this. We didn't draw it for them. They produced it. And I think it totally encapsulates, probably far better than I've explained it, exactly what it is we're trying to do. So to me, that's sort of evidence that people, that the scientists were able, that we were able to communicate to the journalists in a language that they found accessible and easy to use. And I think that's the critical thing, is you need to communicate in a way that people can understand, and then also you need to also have something that resembles a dialogue. So you're not just sitting there like I am now, pontificating about how brilliant you are. You need to actually find out what people think and then have some sort of exchange. So I'm sort of winding to an end for sure, just looking at the time. And I think, the challenge for us is to move things along to the next level. We want to do something. I stupidly invented this catchphrase, which I can't even pronounce now, which is from field to fjord to fork, which sounds, so it's really encapsulating what I was trying to say at the start, of using agriculture to support aquaculture, but really benefiting the consumer. Because I'm really interested in, ultimately I want to benefit the consumer, which is all of us. I want to do something that's of use to the consumer, but it's a challenge. So really, I think that's just all I want to say. This is a sort of summary slide. I mean, it really doesn't matter too much. We've sort of talked about quite a lot of this already. We basically know that we can make EPA and DHA in a plant. So that's the critical breakthrough. You can grow on the land in a plant fish oils that otherwise you would have to take out of the ocean. And we've done lots of field trials to make it work. We know that it works. And we've done lots of fish feeding studies to know that our primary application, if you like, the primary use of these fish oils, which is fish farming, that works as well. So basically, I think it's sort of almost it's the prototype of the technology, which is what I think I have, is proven. So then the next challenge is how you then bring the prototype to market, and that's that'll be another 30 years. Okay, I think I'll stop there. And if you've got, I did say about the importance of dialogue, so this is the chance to ask some questions. Really appreciate your attention. Thanks very much for listening. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Jonathan, for such an engaging talk. It was really fantastic. Thank you. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. So who would like to kick off over there? Yes, lady there.
Is it too early to say how the price of your food would compare with, say, Peruvian anchovies?
I mean, it probably is. It's probably too soon to say. I mean, I think we would always, just thinking about the oil that we want to produce in our plants, we're always going to be pricing it. It will always be priced against fish oil. So we're never going to say, well, and the price of it, for those of you who don't know, which may be all of you, if you wanted to buy a ton of fish oil on the commodity market, it would cost you about $2,000, maybe $2,000 and a bit. I don't know what you do with a ton of fish oil, but that's what it would cost you. So if we make something in plants, so a ton of commodity vegetable oil is about maybe $1,000. So if you bought like a ton of oilseed rape, it would cost, it's $1,000. So there's a big disparity, if you like. So if I can make my GM oil in a plant, so it should be somewhere like $1,000. It costs about $1,000. So it'll be somewhere in between that. But How that then gets passed on to the consumer, I don't know. You'll probably be charged more because it'll be a sustainable source of omega-3s, I suspect. Not that I'm cynical.
There's a question right at the back there.
I've got actually two questions. Why do you, I mean, have you considered producing these fish oils straight for human consumption? Because having to feed it into the salmon or into the fish and then back out
Sure.
might not be as efficient. And the second part is it, you know, converted into fish in the same way as if they were eating the actual?
So the first part of the question, yeah, you're right, and I should have really, I didn't cover that in the talk. The reason that we focused on feeding the fish oils to fish is mainly because so we take 1 million tons of fish oil out of the ocean every year. That's globally, that's the figure, it's 1 million tons, and 80% of that gets fed to fish. So the majority comes out of the ocean and gets fed to fish farming. So that's where the sort of pressing need is. But in terms of what you say, it's perfectly possible to take the plant-derived oils and use it directly for human consumption. So there's no reason why you couldn't do that. That makes complete sense. We were just sort of focusing on the bigger demand. Your second question was?
Is it accumulated into fish as if they were eating anchovies? Doctors say it's like artificial vitamins. I'm not saying it's eating anchovies.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's another reason why we're sort of saying you should focus on feeding it to fish. So in other words, to support the aquaculture industry, which is where most, like I said, that's why in my long-winded introduction, that most of the fish that we eat is being produced by fish farming. So if you went to your GP, like I say, they would say you should get omega-3s into your diet by eating a whole food, like eating oily fish, rather than taking a supplement. So that's the sort of our reasoning behind it, I think.
And you see that
It's so we're
leads to the same kind of fish.
so we're just literally doing that experiment at the moment.
Some years ago, we did some experiments in food R&D, trying to use fish oil to make human foods, and by and large it was a failure. Not many people like mayonnaise, for instance, that tastes slightly of fish.
Yeah.
Because the fish oils oxidise so easily, it was almost impossible to make bulk foods. You do see bread sometimes that's got a trace of fish oil in, and you can feed fish oil to hens, and the eggs are fish oil. But it's very difficult to do it in a large-scale way. I've got another question for you, Howard. That was a comment.
Right. And I would agree with it, yeah.
I'm reminded of the fact that the palm oil industry in Malaysia found that beta-carotene in palm oil was beneficial for health. They tried to separate the beta-carotene from the palm oil and then feed this to humans in supplement form. And they found that although the palm oil containing beta-carotene had desired effects, when they separated the palm oil from the fish oil, from the palm, when they separated beta-carotene from the palm oil, it didn't. I'm conscious of the fact that it may be that when you feed these fish that have this plant-based long-chain fatty acid in them, it might not have the same dietary effect as the natural fish.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that something that should be studied?
absolutely. I mean, so we've spent for 2 or 3 years just doing that so that rather unappealing picture of me with my colleagues standing in the fish farm was the sort of the end point for doing quite a lot of fish feeding studies. So we'd done many much smaller feeding studies before that just to check that, the point that you're alluding to. I mean, we're sort of feeding, so we're sort of trying to demonstrate that our vegetable oil, which is now an enhanced vegetable oil that contains EPA and DHA, is the same as a fish oil. So we're not really purifying, we're just feeding them the oils, saying is one oil the same as the other oil. They're not identical. I mean, they're absolutely not.
Do they have the same dietary influence on humans? That's what
Well, so that's the experiment that we're just doing at the moment. I mean, the expectation is that they should, because I mean, fish oils are not one particular thing. I mean, they're a sort of a fish oil from, that's why I said this is a northern hemisphere fish oil. A northern hemisphere fish oil is quite different from a southern hemisphere fish oil in terms of its fatty acid composition. So it's not like there's not like a gold standard that says it looks like this. Actually, they're all quite different, which is, when you think about it, it's not surprising, because they're different fish species and they're eating different things.
What's the advantage of this approach over, say, farming the
Yeah, I mean, it's when we started doing this, and when we realised how difficult it was, we're thinking, like, well, actually, maybe we should have thought about doing exactly as you said. The problem with trying to grow algae is growing algae is still pretty difficult. And if you think about, if you fill this room full of water and grew algae in it, it would still be like 99% water, and then you'd have to separate the water away from the algae, and then extract the fatty acids out of the algae. Algae don't make oil; they make those EPA and DHA as other lipids, so you can't extract an oil. There's lots of problems in trying to do that. Obviously I've got a vested. I mean, I'm biased, so I'm the last person to ask about doing this. But there are companies trying to do this, and the technology is getting better and better to do the fermentation of algae. I mean, to me, it goes back to what I said about the advantage of working in agriculture as opposed to fermentation is that agriculture is infinitely scalable. So if I'm a producer and I need to produce 10 tons of my omega-3 oil, I'll say, well, I'll rent some fields and I'll grow them and produce it that way. And if next year I need 1,000,000 tons or whatever, I just rent some more fields. If I'm growing it in fermentation, I need to build a whole new fermentation complex, and that costs quite a lot of money to do that. So there's lots of problems associated with doing it. They're not insoluble, but usually, like most things in life, it turns out to cost, and it just costs more money to produce these algal oils than it does the plant oils. Now, there might come a point in the future where they can be produced more cheaply, and then I'll have been wasting my time. But I mean, does that sort of answer what you suggest is absolutely plausible, and there have been through phases of people thinking it's worth doing and not worth doing, but it's.
to me, know nothing about it, seemed a more straightforward way than all your modifying so many different genes.
It's certainly. I say it's a logical way. It's just not. It's not cost effective, which is the problem.
Yes, I think you said something about it just recently to a person, but I'm wondering about how do you extract the oil from the plants?
Well, fortunately, that's the easy bit. So it just relies on the standard processes that you would use for extracting oil from any plant seed. So you could just literally crush them out and use solvents, you can use solvents to extract the oil, and that's what So we're taking advantage of pre-existing technology. So you don't have to invent anything new, thankfully, and so it's really straightforward to do that. There are some other issues that we can talk about, but that part is really simple. So that's the one bit I'm not worried about.
Hi, I've also seen the use of insects in the same sort of thing. Again, you have a vested interest, but
Sure.
I was curious as to what you see as the comparative advantage.
So in the case of insects, insects are a bit like fish and also a bit like humans, so they don't make these omega-3 long-chain polyunsaturates. So you have to feed them a source of omega-3s to get the insects to actually accumulate them. And then presumably you grind the insects and feed the insects up as a flour or a meal or something to something else. So actually I think when people talk about using insects, it's just another step in that processing, if you like. So I guess people talk about saying, well, you could feed algae to insects, or you could feed them offcuts from the fish industry or something. I'm not sure that's the best way to do it. I'm biased, so but I think I can give you a huge long list of problems with every other technology apart from mine. But the problem with my technology is that it's GM. So I don't need to, if you're being completely honest, insects are not GM, algae are not GM. So I think there are issues with all of the technologies. They might all be different issues, but there are issues.
So you know how you said that you take the oils and then feed the fish?
Mhm.
Would that, because they're easily, like degrade very easily in
Mhm.
oil, so would that make it like, because you can feed the fish quite quick, much more quickly than to the humans,
Mhm.
so would that give it an advantage? It's difficult to get it to the market and then to the people.
I mean that's definitely the case, but even that's where I was talking about the logistics of growing stuff in one place and shipping it to another place. You know, that's the sort of literally the practicalities of doing that are the sort of things that if you're in a laboratory you don't think about. And you suddenly think, well, what happens if, you know, it's something ridiculous like 6 weeks for my barrel of oil to get shipped from Canada to Scotland. You know, it's just bobbing around on a boat. And you're thinking, well, I hadn't really thought about this. My oil might be going rancid and oxidizing. You know, I really should have thought about this before. And these are all the sort of things that you don't think about when you've got your sort of super scientist head on and thinking I'm being really clever, and actually you should be really focusing on the practicalities. You know, so, and that's where we've sort of started to more think about the practicalities. So the things like you mentioned, of like, should you be worrying about the stability of the oil? How quickly can you get it to market? How quickly can you get things through the regulatory approval process? You know, or even just through customs. You know, these are really important questions, and it's, you know, stuff that we only started thinking about probably too late.
Also, you know how if it goes rancid very quickly, and if you get, say, plant-based omega-3s that aren't on chain, they always say like don't heat it.
Mm-hmm.
But is that the same for fish oil? Because then if you're gonna consume fish, most of the time we do cook it, and so does that affect anything?
Well, I probably would. Yeah, I wouldn't want to fry it. I wouldn't want to be frying in fish oil. I think that you might make yourself exceptionally unpopular at home if you did that, because I think. But I mean, I think you can cook. I mean, if you can cook a salmon fillet or something like that, which is or a sardine or something like that. That's pretty rich in those oils, and you wouldn't want to overly cook it. Let's put it that way. But I'm my dirty secret is I really hate fish. I mean, that's that sounds worse than it's meant to, but I mean, it's not my sole motivation is to destroy the fish industry. But I mean, I don't eat, I mean, I tell everybody how important fish oils are, but I don't eat as much as I should. And so therefore I'm not expert on cooking fish, that's for sure.
I just wondered if you thought about the environmental impact of, producing this on a large scale, because presumably you would have to clear new land or forest, and then also about aquaculture. Aquaculture also has quite a high impact on the environment. And whether or not, touching on what the other woman said, about whether you could actually cook with this oil yourself and maybe reap the benefit at a human level.
I mean, you're right. My vision is that, okay, so I don't know, like I said, the amount of fish oil we take out of the ocean is 1 million tons, which seems like a big number, but the amount of vegetable oil that we produce by agriculture is probably something like 150 million tons. So 1 million out of 150 is a fraction of a percentage. And if you could, so instead of saying, well, actually, why don't I stop growing, I don't know, soybean oil or maize oil, something that's omega-6 rich and is actually probably doing bad things to your cardiovascular health. So instead of, I don't need more land, I just use my land to do something different.
Well, that's what I was wondering, if you could actually use like rapeseed land, let's say, and
Yeah.
some of this oil, then we could use it to cook with as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I think you could probably, I don't know whether you'd want to use, if you wanted to use our GM oil for direct human nutrition, I think you wouldn't you wouldn't cook with it. I think you would, so you either put it into aquaculture or you use it as a salad oil, or you use it, you could put in,
The taste is not
some people don't like the taste of it, and I wouldn't say I do either, but I'm sort of like making myself out to be a bit of a Philistine here. But yeah, so I think, but so you don't need more land. Aquaculture as a sustainability thing. I mean, it's interesting. I remember when we started working with the aquaculture industry, and there were people there who sort of said, oh well, we're really worried about, aquaculture's got a really bad name. We're really sensitive about the way that we're treated in the media. It's like, well, I'm working on GM crops, so let's face facts. You've got a pretty easy ride here. But you're right. I mean, to be serious, I mean, I think there are issues about how fish farming has been conducted. I think they're trying to improve the whole time. I think they've learnt from their mistakes in that any form of intensive farming will have an impact on its local area. It's the same on agriculture as it is in aquaculture. And you get all the things. You get dead zones that accumulate, in the oceans underneath the pens. You get build-up of diseases like sea lice. They're a massive problem. And so people are now aware of this and are now thinking, well, we need to deal with this. And what I like about aquaculture is that it's a really innovative industry, because it's a completely, it's an industry that's effectively gone from not existing to being where it is now in the space of 50 years. I mean, which is not to say people haven't done aquaculture, in China for 2,000 years, but really at the industrial scale, it's only started in the 1970s. So what's interesting is now that they're now talking about doing huge fish farms really far, far out at sea, using technology that's basically been cannibalized from the oil industry. So taking rigs that they would have, previously, the technology that would have been used to put a North Sea oil rig out in the oceans, because there isn't any oil out there, they've used the same technology to put those platforms to grow salmon out in the oceans, which might sound like you're moving the problem elsewhere, but actually it means that there's far better circulation of waste that's coming out of the farms. There's reduced disease pressure. It's not a perfect solution, but maybe it's a way of really addressing the big challenge, which is how do you feed 7 or 8 billion people on the planet? And my philosophy is you have to look at every technology possible. I don't think you can discard anything, and you can't say, well, this is the best way and I'm not going to do that. But you have to at least test things and see, is it possible, if that makes sense. You had one other point, and I can't remember what it was because I've rambled on about what you were saying. Okay.
Okay, it's time for a couple more questions, I think. Yeah.
Question about the regulatory obstacles. Are you aware of what needs to happen or what needs to be put in place to take FGM products into the market with sort of certifications?
Yes.
What needs to happen there?
I mean, there's a lot of regulatory approval, and I'm fine with that. I think if you're producing a novel GM crop, I think you have to basically go through all the approval processes that need to be done. So for where we are now, the challenge is you would need to get regulatory approval to grow the crop at commercial scale. And then you'd also, so that's agricultural approval, and then you have to get approval for its use as a feed or foodstuff. So there's 2 approvals. In both cases, it would be almost impossible to get those approvals in Europe, because the approval process is a 2-step process that involves both a scientific evidence base and then a political base. And there hasn't been a GM crop approved for commercial growth in Europe in this millennium.
I think there are 2 only.
Yeah, and I think they were approved in the 1990s. So I mean, and that's okay. I have no problem with that. If that's the way it is. That's the way it is. You can go somewhere else where the regulation is different and is more accepting of the technology. So you can go to North America and you go to South America, and you know what the rules are and you know what you have to do. It still is tough. So there's lots to do, and it costs lots and lots of money. And that's the big problem that we have in the public sector, is it would cost something like $15 million to get regulatory approval for this crop.
And how about IP?
So we have some IP, because I think that's, if you're funded by the taxpayer, you need to try and figure out how is the taxpayer going to get a return on it. And therefore having IP, it's not that I'm going to be fabulously wealthy and retire to Tuscany or something like that, which is disappointing, but it's not going to happen. That's just not the way it works. But, so we have IP to basically protect the investment of the taxpayer. IP in, I mean, you probably know this, I mean, IP in plant biotechnology is an utter nightmare. And it's, I mean, you know, you could fill this room, you know, with patents. They would, you know, they're voluminous and incredibly complicated. And you could read them all and you'd still be none the wiser as to who owns what. And it's really, it's very complicated, and which is to say, you know, but I still think you have to try and push forward and say, okay, we will try and see how far we can get in the regulatory approval, and we'll try and see how far we can get in commercializing this technology, and we'll protect it as best we can. Because otherwise I would just, if I didn't do that, I don't know, I'd just give up. So, and I don't want to give up.
Okay, more time for just one last question.
Does actually fish, does it need the omega-3 to survive?
Yes, I mean it does. It doesn't. I mean, so what's interesting is that the farm salmon. So probably one of the reasons why on that graph that showed the salmon, the omega-3s declining in the level of the farm salmon, was that probably 20 or 30 years ago, fish were being fed omega-3s because they were in abundance. They were effectively a waste product of the North Sea fishing industry. That we had tons and tons of cod liver oil was being produced, and in Scandinavia they used to burn it. You know, and when they realised they could feed it to fish, they just fed it in abundance. But you know, so the amount that the fish are getting is a sort of excess of what they need, but they do absolutely need to have a component in their diet, because they can't make the omega-3s themselves in the same way we can't make omega-3s. So our bodies can't make them, and the fish can't make them either. So they absolutely need to have them. Otherwise they sort of end up with problems of, they get cataracts and things like this, and they have some behavioural problems. So so for the fish it's important, for the humans it's important, you know. So that's, you know, the take-home message is we and the fish are one when it comes to these things.
So there must be a minimum that fish survives on, isn't it?
It's about one. So it's about 1%. So I can't remember the level on the slide that I had. It was something. It was dropping. I mean, it's really, really close to that level now. So if you buy your salmon from, if you buy Norwegian farm salmon, which is the sort of cheap bulk salmon, it's really close to that level. If you buy Scottish salmon, which is, you know, I'm not from the Scottish Salmon Marketing Board, but Scottish salmon has got the highest levels of omega-3 fish oils, and it's the gold standard. So you know, that's the one to get.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Jonathan, for that fascinating talk here. So we're going to have a drink now, so hopefully you can join us.
Yes, sure.
And I'm sure there'll be lots more questions in there. But I'd just like, for Vince, just like to present you with a little souvenir.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you.
So thanks very much.
Well, thank you. Thanks very much.